Great. All right, welcome back, everyone. How was that exercise for anyone? For everyone? Did anyone have any trouble with it? Anyone have any fun TV shows they want to share that they played around with?
I will say that I've had moments with GitHub Copilot that are pretty cool, and it just listed out all of the cast with their age and if they're alive or dead, which is exactly what I was thinking.
Nice.
To do, and it just wrote it for me. So
dang.
And far more characters than I would have looked up on my own.
I will say that's something about GitHub Copilot that it is very good at. It's just understanding things you want to fill in data-wise. It's not even just predicting code. Sometimes it'll just even auto-complete your comments for you. It's scarily accurate sometimes. Cool. All right, great. Well, so I'm going to go ahead and run through this exercise as well so you can see the solution in case anyone's having trouble at home. All right. So for me, let's see. Let me actually make sure I'm on the right branch first. Git check out branch 01 solution. OK. Here we go. OK. So from my end, I'm going to go ahead and open up index.html as you all did. And for me, I'm going to go ahead and do Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's the one I'm going to do. And so inside of here, we're going to go ahead and copy over the CDN include that I used earlier. And then from here, we'll go ahead and we'll start setting up the app. So again, the convention here is div id app. And the reason for this is because typically the frameworks will go ahead and render a bunch of stuff in there. So the div, it doesn't have any semantic value as far as from screen readers and that kind of thing. So that's why the convention is usually to use a div. But if for whatever reason you want to attach it to something else, by all means, feel empowered to do so. OK, so what do we say? We're going to create some data. So let's say cons create app equals view. And actually, what I'm going to do, just for the sake of showing you that they're the equivalent, we can basically do view.createApp like this. And then this can be a data function. Now, I'm going to show you a new syntax that I personally prefer to use, which is that I'll use the arrow function for basically assigning a function to data. And then I'll wrap the object in the parentheses. So it basically saves a couple lines of code. So just to show the difference on that real quick. You'll see here, this is the difference, right? Data with the parentheses, then the actual explicit return. This has the implicit return with the arrow, and then we can find our data here. So here, I can do my characters like this, and then I'll go ahead and collapse this now so that we have the single column. OK. So then we'll have 4 objects. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and do real quick. Let's just 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to use a multi-cursor select by holding down Command. Might be Control for Windows. And then I'll just open up basically an object so that I don't have to do that multiple times. Great. And then let's just save that real quick so it'll auto-format. Once again, let's click through and let's add some properties. So we'll have basically the name of the character, and that's basically it. So in this case, we have Aang, we have Zuko, we have Toph, and we have Katara. All right. So first thing first, we're going to do now is let's go ahead and actually render out our empty state. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to do a p element and say there are no characters. And so we'll save this right now, and let's go ahead and actually open this up inside of the browser. So instead of playground, we'll go to index. There you go. There are no characters. And then we'll have the ul here. And just like before, we will practice now the v4 element that we had. So for every character in characters, although actually this is surfacing a philosophical point that I like to do when it comes to naming things. One-off errors are very common in programming, and I find that happens a lot with spelling too. And so the 1s plural has caught me multiple times. So personally, I usually like to just say that it's a list. It's a little bit longer, but then you just have that visual distinction. So character in character list, and then I can just render out character.name, which is great. Although, what's happening here? Why isn't it working? This is a common mistake that we often make when we're sort of creating the app this way, is because what we have to remember to do is we need to tell Vue that we need to mount it. So we're going to go ahead and run the mount command on this. And we're going to mount it to the ID app. And once we do that, save, refresh, Uh-oh, I broke something. Warn selector. Why is that the case? Well, typos. Didn't I say something about one-off errors right here? This is one that'll catch you off guard because in your mind you're thinking CSS selector, but you don't need the extra hashtag symbol. Hey, there we go. Everything's working. So now all we got to do, though, is complete the exercise by saying if character list dot length is equal to 0, then show that. Otherwise, show this. OK, as you can see, boom, there we go. It's working. If we go ahead and just go ahead and update that real quick, you'll see there are no characters showing up. Now, something worth noting about the vif directive, though, is that when you use the vif directive, what Vue is actually doing is, if we take a look here, is that the UL that you have here for the else condition does not even exist on the DOM. So basically, the elements are being destroyed and recreated each time you toggle that. So as you can see here now, if we take a look at the app, you'll notice here that the UL is present, that the p tag is gone. And so this is contrary to another directive that you will see in Vue called v-show, which is, I'll say, its less popular cousin. And that's because what v-show does is it toggles the visibility of the element via CSS. And so the reason you want those two different approaches is because there are times where it might be really performant, or there might be a performance bottleneck of like destroying a list of thousands of items and then having the DOM recreate it every time someone toggles it on and off. And you might just want to show or hide it. So that's where v-show, v-hide could be very useful in those regards. So once again, the idea here, building on what we know and trying to make it easy for us to do the right performance optimization. So that's a trade-off to consider when using VF. But again, I would say 95% of the time that is what you want to use. But the moment you start thinking, oh, I'm toggling, users are going to be toggling this a lot, and it might be expensive to destroy it, reach out for v-show. OK, so that is this exercise. So I'll go ahead and, oh, yes, question here.
Can you have an else if kind of a, like a, v-if and then v-else if?
Yeah, you absolutely can. And so, so the question here is regarding can we extend the if-else statement? And absolutely, because when Evan and the team were designing the API for this, their goal really is to extend upon what you already know. So if you have if and else, why not else if? So in this particular case, let's just go ahead and for sake of, we're going to do the same thing before. This time, character list.length. And then this time, we'll just make it even just to kind of showcase this. And then otherwise, we'll have a p element v-else that's like, there are odd characters, which is a punny joke. Ha, ha, ha. Anyways, so it's even right now. So we add this now, and we add another one. Let's do appa, refresh, boom. So it'll run through all the scenarios and end up at the last one. So generally speaking, from a performance perspective, you do probably want to optimize for your most common scenario at the very top, so you don't have Vue running through everything. But otherwise, yeah, you can else if as long as as you see fit. So let me get the water. Yeah, question here.
I would reach for namespacing character list under this. Is there any gotchas with that?
Namespacing the character list.
Which character in this character list?
This in this character, like down here?
Up in the markup.
Oh, OK. So you're saying you wanted to namespace this?
Yeah, I would put it under this for like, because once you get inside character, is character a local variable or is it on the parent object? So I tend to put like character in this character list, meaning it's on the parent component or parent, in this case the app. Is there any gotchas inside of that?
I see. OK, so let me try to understand. So you're saying that because of the way it's kind of like spelled out, it's kind of confusing. So you want to be explicit about where character list is being called on for the parent?
Adding this dot.
Oh, this dot. OK. We have avoided that up until this point. So how about this? Let me add the this dot question to the next section where we're actually going to start using it. But just at least to make sure I cover a high level. When it comes to the template, so that's actually something, actually, this is worth including in the recording for this section. Something that you'll notice is that we're not actually doing anything special as far as calling the data that's inside of the app, right? We have this character list array. And all we're doing is saying, as we can see here, character list character. We're basically naming things as we go. And it's because Vue is basically trying to do that step of like abstracting away the things that you would normally have to define. So if this were JavaScript, you might have to be like, oh, I have to call the app.data.character list to be like, I'm calling character list. But Vue knows that like basically there are conventions in the way you kind of call things. So rather than having you explicitly define everything, it is trying to basically help abstract that away. But in the future, for those who want to be more explicit, there are ways to like kind of namespace that out a little bit more. So we'll get into that later on. Cool. Go for it.
I mean, you could almost say that character list is like a global in a sense, or global to the app.
Yes, at this point, yeah, especially once we start getting into components, because components obviously is a big part of frameworks these days. That will definitely, character list will become, well, hold on, let me backtrack. So your question here is regarding whether or not character list becomes global to the entire app. And so it is global to the context in that specific rendering context. So in the case of this page, right, it has the character list, it can show it. When we start getting into components, it will have its own scope, and it will be separate from the parent. So in that regard, you cannot expect character list to just show up in any context. So in Vue, it tries to basically try to optimize for performance. There's a performance impact when it comes to like making things global, but more importantly, you have like namespace polluting that often happens, and so Vue tries to protect you from that by forcing you to be explicit with what you want to be shared and what you want to be made global. So there are ways to make global variables in Vue, but I would say most of the time you're probably not doing that. And there are other ways you're trying to share data. So even in the instance of, say, the use case of which we'll cover tomorrow regarding like a user being logged in, that's something that impacts a lot of different components. And so in the past, the first thing you might be like tempted to do is say, well, I'm just gonna make a global variable that says, hey, is a user logged in? Because, I don't know, call it 30% of our code base uses it. But that also means 70% of your code base doesn't use it, and now it has this user logged in state that it has to either worry about or it might conflict for some other reason. And so Vue 3 in particular, especially with the composition API and composables, which I promise we'll cover in this workshop, allows you to then segment that to be very explicit that like, on the 30% that care about user logged in, great, drop it in. Otherwise, you don't even have to worry about it. And so we'll definitely be talking about that. But does that help to answer your question? OK, solid. Did you have a question?
A small thing on your V4.
Yeah.
Like a first and last equivalent. So you want to do them in commas, but not on the last person. AngularJS to be first and last when you're looping.
Oh, they have the first. OK. So you're saying like if we want to render like the list out as like a string?
It's a string with commas, but not on your last guy.
Got it. OK. So the question here is around if we wanted to actually list the string of characters instead. That actually, I would say, OK, there's a couple ways we could do this. With the information we have now, the V4 actually would probably feel a little bit clunky because, well, and let's show this. So let's go ahead and do this. So with the information we have here, if we wanted to have a P element here instead that, say, took a span of every character in character list, list, yep, OK, then I'm going to do the character.name. OK, so this should just like give us a mash of things. Oop, I did not close it. Save. OK, boom, right? But what we need is we need that comma space. But you're probably also thinking, oh, OK, let me refresh this now. OK, that looks better. But to your point, we need the ability to cut off the last part. And so, gosh, I think the way I would do this at first glance would basically be I would probably just actually do a pull. No, I think I would just do another inline. Using only the techniques we have right now, I would say we have if character list, or OK. So we want to pull out, OK, here's a great example of where we need the index of something, right? And so I'm going to repeat this a lot because I think this is a core thing I'd like to see other APIs continue as well, is that we build on what you already know. And since we're in a for loop in JavaScript, we can actually pull the index out by just pulling it out as a second argument, because this is the standard JavaScript API. So again, Vue really tries not to like come in and like reinvent things for you. Like once you learn it, it's a convention we know, why not use it? So then if we can go index is equal to character list dot length minus 1. If that is true, empty string, otherwise comma like this. And did I slightly do that off? Aha, I can't spell. Off by 1 once again. And autocomplete messed me up. Length, length, length. This. Great. There we go. So there are ways, though, if let's say that in your app that you want to go ahead and do, like, you constantly stringing stuff together and you want it to always leave off, there are ways you can create custom directives. So you could pass it in and it would do something specific. Most of the time, I think what I've seen people do instead is that when we talk about computed properties in a little bit, that's usually something that people use a lot for these sort of like computations, which we'll cover then. Does that help answer your question, though?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. But you're right. I think Angular did have some nice like syntactic sugar for stuff like that. So I would say that absolutely, that is a great callback. OK, cool. Did anyone have any other questions before we move on from this section? OK. Boom. Git commit. Sure, add solution for avatar avatar exercise. Great. Then we'll check out O2 begin. Whoop. Git checkout branch O2 begin. Let's push up all that other stuff. Solution O2 begin. Great. All right. So let's go back to the sandbox. Or playground. OK, so the next thing we're going to do, as far as for editing purposes, we're now in the methods and more directive section. So that's that slide to cue that. OK, so we've learned how to create an app. We've attached some reactive data. That was fun, hopefully pretty easy to do. And now, of course, we want to talk about how we deal with user input, right? Because that's what a lot of JavaScript's value is handling the interactivity of your website. So the first thing we want to talk about is let's open Playground actually in Chrome. So we have that. So let me just open a new tab with this. And this will be Playground. OK. So for the sake of Playground demo purposes, let's just use the standard example of the counter app, right? Which is the fact that if we go inside of here, and this time I'm going to, let's do that sequentially. So I'll put a horizontal line here, line break, there we go. And then here we'll just do an h1, we'll call it counter, and p count. Wow, we need to edit that out. That was a bad typo. OK, great. We have a count, and then we have a button where we want to increment count. This should look pretty familiar. 10. OK. So if you scroll down, I don't like the fact that this is all the way at the bottom. I'm going to actually move this up to the top so that for subtitles and purposes, it'll be easier. Copy that. HR. Great. So we'll do this from most recent to oldest. OK. So here we have our counter. And your question is probably thinking, OK, how do we actually change data? Because after all, it's fun to render some reactive stuff. We want to do more with it. So inside of Vue, we have our data here. But the question is, we want to actually change it. And so the option that we want to learn about next is the concept of methods. And so if we think about functions in JavaScript, right, typically we would have something like let count equals 0. And then you'd have a function called like increment. And it would say count plus plus, something along this lines. When you think of methods, think of it as functions from JavaScript that are available for your app to call at any time. That's the best way to think about it. So from this perspective, we would actually want to then define a method. We'll just say increment count. And inside of here, this is where a question that we had earlier comes into play. So when you want to refer to something else in the app, so in this case, we want to actually refer to this count property inside of data. Vue is smart about a lot of things, but if we just currently say count plus plus, this is not going to work. And the reason for that is because if we know, as when it comes to JavaScript and programming, scoping is a thing. So it doesn't know basically where to fetch count from. And so this is where the dreaded keyword of this comes into play, when it comes to JavaScript. The this keyword is where Vue basically takes the context of the app, and it will basically figure out where count exists. So from Vue 2, you might have noticed it from like this.data.count. This would be an explicit thing you might do. But because Vue knows that oftentimes we're referring to data or compute it, it will, unless you have some really clear name clashes, you can just use this dot whatever property you're looking for. And that goes for basically anything you're defining within this options API. And the benefit of this is that while some people find that this keyword confusing, the point of it, I think at the time when the API was being designed, is around the fact that like you shouldn't really have to think about what this even means. The point is that think of this as the app, and that way you come in and you refer to this app, and that's it. So when I was teaching other people Vue for the first time, even though they didn't have a lot of JavaScript experience, they got the convention that like as long as I call this, it refers to my app, and I'm not going to learn about scoping or anything, it just works. And that in itself is an advantage from like a learning perspective. But just know that like you don't have to use this, so that in the future, if people are actively avoiding it, we can go ahead and do that once we learn about composition API. But while we're in the options API right now, this is how we actually refer to things within this configuration object. OK, so now that we have the this count plus plus, what we're going to do here now is we're going to go and say, how do we actually call the thing? And so what we're going to do is we're going to, just like before, we're going to use a Vue directive to actually call the thing. And so we're going to use v-on. That is the directive that you'll want to learn for this. Because similar to what you know from JavaScript events, on click, on key up, this is the same idea. We're extending on that theory. And so instead of just like on click, though, which you might think that's what I'm probably going to guess, Vue, because v-on itself is the directive, you have the ability to pass it an argument through the colon symbol. So it's v-on colon, the event that you want to call. And the event you want to call, again, is standard JavaScript events. We haven't made anything up. So key up, anything that you can think of that's standard in the JavaScript API, that exists. And so when you click, what do we want to refer to? Well, guess what? We want to refer to our increment count function that we had earlier. The key thing here to remember, though, is that you don't want to actually call the function, because this is something that will be called when the event is triggered. So basically, you're passing a reference to the function inside of your app. And then when it's clicked, it will be called. That's the reason why you don't call it immediately. So if we save that, and let's go ahead and now refresh our page, you can see, boom, things are actually changing, and they're being tracked. So that's fairly straightforward. What about something a little bit more complicated, like what if I wanted to set the amount that the counter is being incremented by? OK, well, in this case, you're going to say, well, let's say we have a label here. Let's say increment amount. And then it'll be increment by. And then you probably have some element here that's a number. And then so if we refresh this, theoretically, what you would want is the ability to change the amount that increment count is changing. So how would we actually do that? Well, first of all, what we want to do is we need a reactive data property, because we want to track what the heck is going on. So at this moment, if we go down into our data, we have this count. And we can say, we can just have increment amount be a reactive data property. And currently, it's 1. And then what we want to do then is tie it into our increment count down here. So let me actually collapse this. And so rather than just incrementing it by 1, which is the plus plus, we'll do plus equals this dot increment amount. Whoops. Increment amount, save. And to show that this is working, I'm going to switch this over to 10. And we're going to go ahead and refresh this. And you can see it's jumping, as you would expect, by 10. But we want to be able to change this, right? How do we actually basically connect these two? So let me go ahead and actually wrap this part in the div real quick. Oop, that's not what I wanted at all. Div. There we go. OK. That should give it a new line. Perfect. OK. So the first thing first is we need our input to display what it is that value is. So how we do that? Normally, we would say value equals 10. This is standard HTML. But this is static, right? This is something we define ourselves, has nothing to do with our app. How do we connect the two? The way we do that is with another Vue directive, because what are we doing? We're now extending upon our HTML to give it superpowers to do what? To have some interactivity, to be supercharged with reactive data. And so you do that via vbind, right? You're binding the value to a dynamic property. That's the way to think about it. And so here, what are we binding it to? Oops, excuse me. But here, though, what are we binding it to? We're not binding it to 10. That's not what we're binding by. We're binding it to increment amount. So we can refer directly to the variable that we talked about earlier. And so to show that this changed, this time I'm going to change increment amount to 8. And if I refresh, boom, there we go. We can see that they're now talking to each other. And so now we can see when we increment count, this is great. It's actually changing. But what do we know about this? We know that if we change now to 12, is it going to make a difference? No, it's not. In fact, it's going to reset itself back to 8. What's going on? Well, the reason for this is because you've told Vue, track this thing and make sure that its value is always bound to this increment amount. That's what you've told it. And so this is why even though we've changed it once and we try to like increment the count, it's setting it back because that's what Vue is doing its job that you told it to do. So what do we want to do? We want to actually update increment amount whenever someone actually types inside of the input element. So how might you do that? Well, we're going to actually listen to an event. And so what is that? We learned it is v_on, and we're going to listen to the input event. And what we're not going to do, though, is we're not going to inline the function that will change this, because I find that to be very clunky. So we're going to call it change increment amount. And so what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, on the input event for this input element, when we get an input event, I want you to run this function, which we have not created yet, to be clear. So we'll come in here, and we'll go to a method, and we'll say change increment amount, just like that. And here's the difference, though. Now that you're actually listening to an event, you actually get a default event object that's passed to you, once again, just like you would expect from standard JavaScript. So I'm going to call that event. And what we're going to do is, though, we're just going to log the event to prove that this is working. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up, refresh. And if I go ahead and type in here, or anything happening, look, the input event is being fired. So what do we know? Well, we know, again, we won't dive into the details of it, but event.target.value is what you're looking for. That's usually the convention for when you're playing with form elements. So to show you this works, if I delete this, you can see it's actually showing up inside of my terminal, as you would expect. And so now that we're actually getting the dynamic value of the event, we can then say this dot increment amount is equal to event.target.value. Now, to show that this works, we're just going to also, I'm a big fan of like making sure things are actually working correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and inside of here, we're just going to add a quick h1 for the increment amount. So you can see here, we're rendering the increment amount here and here. And if I change this now to 18, you'll see that it is being tracked correctly. It's in here. And now we can increment the count. And then, it's not working as correctly. Anybody have a guess why?
String.
It's a string. That's right. So you might think, OK, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come in here. I'm going to wrap this in a number, be done with it. All right, let's refresh. Let's make sure that works. Let's do 80 this time. All right, that works. But I'll do you one better. Instead of having to come in here and do it here, which is kind of silly, because the increment amount, it already has a target value. And what's a bit odd, too, is that, if we look at our input element, we are already type number. Why is that the case? Well, basically, what we want to do is, oh, wait, I'm one step ahead of myself. I don't think this will work. Hold up. We'll rewind the recording on that just real quick. OK, where was I? I was here. OK. All right. So this is one way to fix it. Here's the thing, though. If we take a look at our inputs, Sam had made the joke that I showed in the tweet earlier that most of the web is rendering a list. Well, I'd say a lot of the web is also filling out forms, right? I mean, that's what a lot of our bread and butter is, too. So Vue was like, OK, this is a lot of work to do every single time you have a form element, right? Like, oh, gosh, what if we could just learn from what Angular did and do two-way binding in this particular context? So instead of having to always define and change and track all this stuff, what if we had a directive called vModel, and we tracked it directly to the data property that we cared about? Once you have this vModel, all of this, I say disappears, but vModel is syntactic sugar for basically configuring all that underneath the hood, which means that inside of our method down here, we don't even need this as well. So I can save that. And now, if we refresh, once again, let's do 800 this time and increment, you'll see that things are changing just as you would expect with this vModel. And what's even more interesting, if you'll notice, it's not a string anymore. Because, once again, what Vue tries to do is it looks at the developer experience and it goes, hey, I know that I'm looking at an input element. Because here's the thing, vModel works with other form elements like checkboxes, radio, select. You can do all that. But it also knows what kind of input event to listen for. Because you'll know that, like, especially with select, that one's a tricky one. I always have to look up the docs every time I work with select. Like, I have to code it from scratch. But here, it actually knows that we are type number in here. And because of that, the value is actually tracking inside of its app has automatically been converted. Now, if we did string, for example, here, or not string, text, revert, you can see, oh, it actually is smart enough to even to know what to do. But the one thing I wanted to show, because this used to be a Vue 2 thing, is that you could actually attach arguments, or basically like modifiers, to your directives. So in this case, it's a vModel of number, for example. But I'll look for, there will be other opportunities. I'll get to present that later on. OK, so we've done that. We've done the vModel. OK, does anyone have any questions about what I've shown so far? OK. All right, so what I'm going to do here, let me go ahead and first start by committing this so I don't forget. O2 exercise, tick status, update playground with methods, and new directives. OK. Then we can push O1, O2 exercise. Origin O2 exercise. Great. OK. Here is your challenge. So we're going to go back to your index.html page that you were playing around with your characters. And this time, under each of your character, I want you to go ahead and add a favorite button to it. And when a user clicks on that favorite button, go ahead and update a separate list that tracks your favorite characters. And as a bonus, if you have some time, go ahead and actually create a form that will allow you to add more characters to whatever the preset of data already exists. So with that, I'll give you all 10 minutes, and see you all then. right, great. Welcome back, everyone. How was the exercise? Did anyone have any issues here regarding? Okay. Looks like so we're pretty good. But a couple questions did come up during the exercise that I did want to cover because I thought they were great. So the first question I want to cover here is in regards to, okay, let me just make sure I context set real quick. Okay. Okay. So the first question was around the idea of DOM checking. So in other words, we have an input element here. And at the time when we had like a value of like, so let's just set this correctly. So if we had a value of 10, for example, and we refresh this, you'll see that inside of our input element, yep, that's, okay, sorry. We see that our input element here does contain the 10. If we switch it to 100, it still contains the 100 in there. Oh, that's a great, Mark, is the screen get switched up on that one?
Not sure what the deal is there.
I can totally reset context.
Maybe somebody's streaming out too. It looks like somebody, because it's Chromecast, right? So maybe somebody streamed out to the TV and we just need to change the source.
It's weird that it wouldn't do that automatically.
Oh yeah, maybe somebody hit the AirPlay button.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So for the sake of the recording, I'll jump back to the beginning.
Not a big deal.
Cool.
Yeah. It's only a few seconds.
Oh, was it? Should I just?
Well, no, we'll start from the break.
Okay, so start from the top. Okay, great. All right, welcome back, everyone. So there were a couple questions during the exercise that I thought would be great to cover. So the first of which is in regards to a strategy that was very common, which was DOM checking. So in other words, if we take a look at our code right now, what we're doing is we're tracking the increment amount here inside of view. So we have that v model, and that is being tracked inside of our reactive data. And so the question here was like, couldn't we theoretically remove this, right, and just check the element directly? So in this case, like as we can see here, if I save right now and I refresh, if I update this to 123, view is not doing anything with it because the browser is already tracking it, right? So the question is, why are we like checking it again? Or tracking it in, sorry, let me rephrase that. Oh, good, great. That way I can redo that question anyways. Gotta love recording.
Sirens.
It's impressive that it comes all the way up here, considering how high we are. We're waiting on sirens right now for those listening in live right now. Do you think I should just take it from the top again, or do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Sorry, y'all. Okay. So let me reset the context. It was here, 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 here. Okay. Refresh. Great. Oh wait, nope. This was wrong. Save. Refresh. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive into the solution, I want to cover two questions that came up during the exercise. The first of which is around the strategy of actually tracking the increment amount. So as we can see here, what we're doing right now is using view to track the increment amount using this vModel directive. So down here, we can see inside of this reactive data, we have it tracked in here. And the question is, why do we even do this? Which is actually a good question, because theoretically, if we go ahead and comment this out, and we go up here, and we don't even attach any view powers to this particular input element, technically the text element knows what it's doing, right? It knows that it has this, I should have chose a smaller number, it's fine. It knows that it has 123 inside already. Why are we using view to also check it? So in other words, like especially before sort of reactive frameworks became really a big thing, a common strategy for this was that every time we wanted to increment the count, we would basically go and check the DOM to see what the source of truth is, right? And so a completely valid approach and one that we use for many, many years in web development. But as websites and applications have gotten more complex, the problem is that if we were to have some method, again, call it check input for value that's being run, right here. Again, this is pseudocode, just in case anyone's afraid to miss anything. The reason this ends up becoming a problem is because there ends up being kind of like an inefficient performance bottleneck, in the sense that now every time someone's running this increment count, they're going to check the DOM, regardless of the fact that nothing has actually changed. And so that's what a lot of reactivity system has provided for us from like a developer experience convenience, and also abstracting some of those performance concerns away, is because, again, for this particular example, the performance difference is probably negligible, to be honest, to just check an input element real quick. If it's a number, pass it back, and then run it. But we can envision when you have complex data visualizations, when you have a lot of things working with each other, if you have to check the DOM every single time for every single element that has that source of truth, you're going to end up with some conflict. And then it'll probably be slower because, once again, if those things haven't changed, there's no reason to even check that to begin with. So as a result of that, this is why in sort of the more modern frameworks, we have the ability to cache things and have these reactivity tracking. And that's where the advantage of actually making sure that Vue tracks that reactive data makes our lives a lot easier. So great question, again, for that one. OK, so let's go ahead and reset this part real quick so we don't ruin the code. 1, 2, 3. And then we had the V model here. Increment amount. Let me save that, make sure this works. This does. Great. OK. In addition, there was a second question here in regards to what happens when you actually want to pass an argument to the method. So in this particular case, what if, for example, in increment count, we wanted to pass it our own variable? So in this case, let's just say 10. And then for whatever reason, again, we're spitballing here. In increment count, we're going to check if the argument is greater than the what's inside of this increment amount, then we'll basically use the argument instead of the reactive variable. Again, a little bit convoluted, but we're kind of going on the fly here. So in increment count, I mentioned before that typically when something's being run, it's by default pass an event object. So once again, to show that this works, let me just go ahead and log event real quick and then remove the argument. Save, refresh, console. You can see the pointer event is being registered. However, if I add that 10 here and I refresh, you'll see 10 is being passed. And that's because what Vue does is it goes, OK, at this point, I don't know how many arguments you're going to pass, because you could pass a bunch of different ones if you wanted to. And so rather than try to sort of force you to remember that the event object is there, the default event object that's being passed to you basically gets pushed to the end. So if we still wanted to access the event object in this regard, we would say, for example, now this is not actually new. This is not actually event. It's new amount. And then we also have the event object that's being attached at the end. So once again, just to make sure that this actually works as intended, you can see here that, the event. Oh, I remember now. OK, that's why I wanted to show this. I forgot. OK, let me rewind that, answer back. So when it comes to how Vue handles that default event, because it cannot predict where that default event needs to be brought in, you actually pass it in as this. Basically, you explicitly define it. So you can see here, $event, that passes the standard JavaScript event to the function. And that way, in case you have any sort of funky things going on, it's very, very clear what you're looking for. The other thing I wanted to show with this as well in the docs is that, I'm not a huge fan of inline events, but I just want you to know it is possible. You can inline the event directly there and just actually run the thing if you want. But generally speaking, I find that it's a lot cleaner to just have the method there because, again, HTML is meant to be, in my mind, to be readable for users. And then the logic and all that stuff, we should abstract that away as much as humanly possible. Because what it does is it lowers the barrier of entry for those who might want to come and contribute, particularly like if you have designers on your team who have front-end abilities but might not be that comfortable with JavaScript. By abstracting that stuff away, it just makes the code a lot more approachable for them. So the $event is the answer for that. So just to show that inside of the code, actually, so that we have consistency. Here, again, this is the event, but it is not passed by default. We need to go inside of here, and we need to say $event. Now when we increment, there we go. We have our pointer, and we have our count. All right. Question?
So what's the difference between the @click and the v_on_click? @click that's just an HTML5 attribute, right?
Ah, okay, good question.
We don't have to get into it right now.
No. It actually segues really well. So something you'll notice here is that right now we're doing this v_on and v_bind. Where's my v_bind? Oh, v_bind is gone in this particular case. Okay, that's fine. We interact with elements a lot as far as like interactivity and events. So rather than forcing you to type v_on all the time, there is a shorthand, which is the @ symbol. And so if you shortcut that, that'll basically do exactly what you expect in terms of the v_on, but otherwise it's a syntactic sugar to basically say you don't have to type those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters anymore, just do @, which honestly I think is a fairly intuitive shortcut when it comes to saying, yes, @click, do this thing, @keyup, do this thing, etc. And so I mentioned v_bind, and just for the sake of showing that one, I'll just do a data attribute called increment by, because sometimes you're rendering stuff to the server or some other app needs something here. And let's say you want to render increment amount to this p element. And so if we look at this p element right here, you'll notice, did I do the wrong one? It is, no, that should be, oh, I didn't refresh, that's why. Boom. Okay, you see that the attribute data increment by is there available for you, but once again, we need it to be bound. And I said before that you could do v_bind, and that will go ahead and change that to actually say, yes, the increment by we're looking at is 8. But again, dynamically binding attributes, very, very common. So what can you do instead? You can just delete v_bind and just prefix your attribute with the colon, another shorthand. Right or wrong way? There's no right or wrong way. Most people end up eventually getting used to the convention. So you see that a lot in code bases. But otherwise, it's up to you on how you want to write your code. Cool. So what I'm going to do now for the solution is we're going to go ahead and run through this. OK, so inside of my index.html file, all right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a button to each character. Well, we have our list here that we have. And all we're going to do is I'm going to do this. I'm going to just, for the sake of making it easier, let's make the p element wrapping around that. So we save that. This is good. And then we can then go ahead and add a button. So just do. And I'm going to add a star here for favorite. There we go. We have a favorite button. Great. Now, what we need to do is actually add a favorite character. So @click, we will say favorite character. We haven't written the method yet. So we'll go down inside of our app here. And so inside of data, we don't need that. So we need it here. So we need methods for favorite character. And this is where the argument actually comes into play. Because at this point, well, there's a couple things. One, we need a favorite list. So I like to try to go alphabetical whenever it makes sense. So favorite list. That's just an array. And so what we want to do is we're going to do this .favorite list .push. What are we pushing? We want to push the character that's actually being called. And so the way we detect this is we go inside of our favorite character, and we're in our loop, so we can actually pass character directly to our function, which means character now should be here. And we can go ahead and push that over. And so to show that that works, let's go ahead and add another list right here. This time we'll just add a h2 of favorite characters. Once again, I see a typo there. I'll fix that real quick. V for character in favorite list. And then inside of here, we're just going to render out the character. OK, so as we can see here, actually nothing's showing up. So actually, this is a good instance where we might actually want to do no favorite characters left. So this is where the v_if works well. So v_if favorite characters or favorite lists .length. Actually, you know what? I usually prefer the greater than 0 as my first one. So we're going to swap this. We're going to go down here, and we'll swap the v_if for the ul, because that's my preferred default state. And this empty state is really a fallback for when it doesn't have it. There we go. No favorite characters yet. V favorite Toph. There we go. Toph, Zuko, Aang, Katara. Everything's working. Now, of course, you can do deduping and all that fun stuff, but I'll leave you all to play with that. And then there you go. Create form. OK. And then let's go ahead and add the characters as well. So let me just commit this part of the exercise. O2 solution. This git commit feature, add favorite functionality. Great. So what we want to do next is we want to actually then add a new character. How do we do that? Well, at this point, the easiest thing for me to do is let's go ahead and create another h2. And this h2 will be new character. And then what do we have? We have basically one attribute, which is the character name. And so let's say name. And then we'll have the input. And this will be text. That's fine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do, if we think about the data structure we're probably looking for, eventually characters have more attributes, right? So if we think about the reactive data we're looking for, we can say there's going to be a new character object that we're basically going to be tracking inside of here. So with that, we can then say vModel equals new character. And you know what? We actually know how we kind of want it structured. So we're actually going to go ahead by default, go ahead and actually define the name inside of the data so we're clear to future developers that it's not an implicit thing. And then new character dot name. And so to show that that works, what we're going to do once again is let's go ahead and use the pre-element. And so the pre-element is a handy little trick to actually render your reactive data in a way that's actually readable. So here, I'll show you the difference. So if we save here and refresh, you'll see that the name is actually being rendered kind of in its code block form. But if you didn't do a pre-element and you just did like the p-element, for example, which is what I might do by default, you'll see that it basically automatically just renders it as a normal string. And so the pre-element, it's not as obvious in this particular case, but when you have like JSON objects that's multiple lists, it's really nice to have it automatically formatted with just using an HTML element without having to do anything special. So there we go. And now if we come in here, hey, there we go. Look, things are actually changing. So once again, if I say appa, right, and then, nothing's adding yet. Why? Because we haven't actually had a way to actually push the character to it. So how might we do that? Well, for the sake of showing you all something new, right, we talked about vModel and all that stuff. And we know how to do we can click on the button to add it. But what if instead we did something a little bit more fun? Let's not do a button this time. What if we wanted to do a key up, and then when we hit enter, then we push it? How would that work? Well, we can actually do an at key up event. And then we can say, basically add new character. And so if we come in here and we go to methods and we go add new character, at this point, we do know what the new character is, so we don't need to pass any arguments to it because that is already being tracked inside of our reactive data. So what we get to do is we can do this .characterList.push. What are we pushing? We're pushing the new character. And not just any new character, it's this new character. So if we refresh that and do appa, you'll see that's weird. What's happening? Well, any guesses?
Every key up.
Yep. Every key up is just like firing off. It's like add. We don't want that. We really only want to do this when we only want to do it when you hit key up enter. And so some of you are probably thinking, OK, so I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the event. I'm going to do event.target. And then I have to figure out what the key code is. But I got you all one easier. Yep. So the audience already got it. So what we can do here, I mentioned before about modifiers to the API. On the key up, Vue also knows we have common things we're using all the time. And enter and escape keys, those are common. So all we can do is we do .enter on this. Refresh. Appa's fine. Hit enter. And then there you go. The reason it's blinking is because of that odd character. So actually, I think that functionality is basically done. So let's don't do that. Oh, right, I had that whole list thing. That's fine. OK, then if I just add it twice, there you go. Now you'll see both of them. And so the final thing, just from like a code cleanup perspective, is probably just once we push the character, just new character equals, just like a new object. And so just to prove that that works, appa, enter, that's fine. Then we can say like Azula. There we go. Appa, Azula. And you can see that our name input is being reset properly. Cool. Does anyone have any questions about what I've showed you so far? So let's go ahead and commit this. Although, I just realized I think I committed something I wasn't supposed to. Add favorite functionality. Git, never mind. That's an alias that I have in case anyone's watching. That's not a normal Git command. That is a Git alias for git reset soft head, whatever that complicated thing is. Okay, so that's that. Git checkout. O2 solution. Oh, wait. I need the branch because it's new. All right, great. That's fine. Okay, so git commit add feature, add favorite, and new character functionality. And we have here commit feature add example for arguments for methods and default event object. Okay, cool. How's everyone feeling? Do people want a break? Are we good to push to another section? Okay, we're gonna do a tech break real quick.
Well, lunch is here.
Oh, lunch is here. Okay, so we're gonna break here and we will pick up where we left off later.
Should we pick up at like 12:30 or to keep things going?
Is that it's 45 minutes? Is that enough time for people?
Yeah, it should be.
Okay, let's do that.